Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3, bottom of page 1313, Aleph Shin Yud Gimel. We finished the paragraph. To sum up quickly, what we learned was after, and this is a continuation that began of the discussion that began on page 1307. 1307, Aleph Shin Zayin, that to understand the transformation of darkness. We said Vayorim Keren Meshiche, and also led to understanding what he said earlier. Vayorim Keren Meshiche connected to Vayemele Yenason, the whole discussion of Zgula, which is transforming the darkness, not just illuminating it. So he's now continuing, and after explaining the darkness of existence and how that evolved, first from the earliest stages of concealment, even in the Tzimtzum and the Eris within the Kalim in Atzilus, the concealment of the HaBlikvul, the infinite energy, then the concealment of the HaGvul, the that's higher than Islapshus in containers. He went all the way to Biyah after the partition, the Parsa, and all the way to Asiya Gashmis and Chumris, what he called Chesha Kofel Mechupla, a double and a quadruple darkness. So now comes the Avedis Adam. This is telling Avedis Adam, this Gaber ala Cheshach, to overpower the darkness of the animal soul and to leave Lotseis min hacheshech, to free himself from that state. And then the engraving or the scraping that he called the engraving or scraping from outside, getting off the scraping of the crust, and then the scraping from within, where we transform the animal soul and convincing it that it too should appreciate and long for godliness. So the scraping he called was the leaving of Golus, was the sadness and that sense of this displeasure. So then all of that leads to the animal that pushes aside the negativity of the animal soul, and it should elevate into the divine soul and not have pleasure in this world. First it should be push it away, and it should not have pleasure in this world. And the toiv, the goodness in the animal soul, should be encompassed in the divine soul and desire godliness. And this in turn spills over and affects all the dvarim gashmi, the physical matters and affairs in this material world. So that elevates it all, elevates these sparks. And through this birurim that you do below also creates that ripple effect through Osedish Talshlus, that also the containers of Atzilus now become more refined, and they're able to draw down and internalize even air that before was concealed from them, what he called before the Etzema air that's higher than manifesting in the containers. And then finally, in turn, that has to also be drawn down into Biyah, not just enough that elevation happens in Atzilus, that comes down Biyah. And he made reference to what we learned earlier in the Maimorim in the volume 2 about Shabbos and the weekdays, the process of Birurim of the weekdays, how they get elevated in Shabbos. Step number 1, what he said, Maila Shabbata, and then comes the Eir Atzilus, comes back into Biyah. As we learned there, the Birurim are very Yasher and Erchezer. He didn't go into, he just mentioned details, but it's all elaborated there, the difference between the Birurim. But it's a process that first you start from the bottom up, you draw down the energy from the top down. In Shabbos itself, there's one level higher than the next level. And basically, and Shabbos, like he said, is a birur of echel metechel, that the kelim themselves, because that's what Shabbos is. Shabbos is Atzilus, it's not that work, the hard work of transforming the negative and the darkness of this world. That's birurim of the weekdays. Shabbos is the elevation that happens through the birurim, that the containers are able to receive higher levels of godliness, and that too comes back into Biyah. That's where we concluded. So now we're going to continue the next paragraph. And as remember, there's always this process. As I said, there's a whole many levels of how we travel this journey from the bottom up, from a very darkened state and a very, let's call it materialistic state, to becoming a more spiritual and more refined and a more elevated human being and a more elevated world. But there are many levels in this process, as they also indicated in the parentheses. There's many levels of this process of refinement. But essentially, in the language of Chassidus, is the refinement of the containers to be able to receive more energy. In Olam Hazeh, it's the refinement of the material containers, including that of the animal soul and of this crass, mechumristic world, materialistic world, that it should become, instead of focused on its own egocentric, on its own independent consciousness, to become a keli to godliness. And this, in turn, in all the worlds has this type of impact, the highest worlds, and that too is drawn down below. But as we're going to discuss now, let's talk about the different levels in this, that ultimately the goal is transformation, not just illumination. So he says, V'hine b'chol zeh. So the new paragraph on page 1313, the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. V'hine b'chol zeh. Now with all this, hagam sha'yidei zeh nimshach tesus seidus. So with all these great things that he just spoke about, so though it's correct to say that we're drawing down more energy than was in existence in the first place. That was the whole process, as I explained yesterday. The process of what? That there's existence, it's a beautiful world God created, but God wanted that through Aveda, we should expand the channels and expand the containers and expand everything to draw down more divine energy. So it's correct to say that even though Hagam Shaidezen Nimshach Tesu says, Shemeir Hagili Bakelim, that this Gili should radiate in the containers in Atzilus and below. Yet at the same time, with all this achievement, and it is an achievement, no one's dismissing or minimizing it, it's still all within the world of Eir. We're not talking about Loisha Keli Nasa Eir, not that the Keli became Eir. To put it in simple English, when a teacher teaches a student, and the student is a beginner, the Ben Chomish Mikra, a 5-year-old, and what he has containers are capable of learning Pasuk, Mikra, Chumash. He learns Chumash and Rashi. Then he turns 10 years old, his mind has expanded, he's learned enough, he's matured more, he now can learn Mishnah, Benesel Mishnah. So what's happening? The containers are becoming more refined, more expansive, more mature, and they can now learn something of a higher level. He turns 15, he can start learning Gemara. And this is in addition to all the different levels that a person grows in their mind, even in learning Mishnah itself and Mikra itself and Mishnah itself and Gemara. There comes a point where this student matures into a full adult, 20 years old, 25 years old, and now his containers have become more expanded, more refined, and he's able to understand deeper things that the teacher taught him. The teacher can now teach him more Eir. All this is that the Kelim are expanding and broadening and allowing more energy. Just like I mentioned the example of a muscle. When you exercise and condition your muscles, so you can run faster, you can run for a longer period of time, you can throw a stone farther. That's all that the Kelim have become more conducive and they're more refined so they can draw more of the faculties within them, to use the example he gave earlier. But it's all about the Eir coming into the Keli. It's not that the Keli itself has become Eir. The Keli has become more Keli to Eir. That you could say. But it's still primarily is the Eir that's really we're talking about. It's the Eir that is becoming more abundant. When you say, when a person turns 40, or after 40 years, they appreciate the depth of their teacher, they wouldn't appreciate it. Again, it's a matter of Eir. That Eir, that earlier they didn't fully internalize or integrate or understand, they now understand. That's the process of all growth. Everything we learned earlier about mutva, murgish, muskel, if you recall, was all that. It was the maturity that allows you to be a container to higher states of energy, of higher states of consciousness, and higher states of divine energy as well, divine consciousness. Then there's a whole other thing, which is that the very entity itself becomes transformed, which we've discussed already, But he's now pointing that out because that was part of this whole discussion of Einot. The Kamaykenu Gamba Halos on the Tzutzis. So too is it when we elevate the sparks that we spoke about. Remember, Birurim is what? A Birur means to separate. Separate what? The divine spark that is embedded and even concealed within every physical object. Like what the Pasuk says, Lo ya'lechem levada yichya adam. Not on bread alone does a human being live. Ki im al moitze pi Hashem yichya adam. But rather on the spark of the divine or the words of the divine within the bread. So it's embedded in there and we have to recognize it. So that is called in Chassidus, the expression in Kabbalah and Chassidus, halos hanetzutzis, birur hanetzutzis. First birur, separating, clarifying, and then halah, elevating the spark, like we said that the spark gets elevated in the previous paragraph and becomes encompassed in divine energy. Like he explained in Tanya, like he explains in Tanya chapter 7 that he referred to. So he says the same is when halos and tzuz gam k'moshe elim v'nechlon b'bchinas halakus datzilis. As these sparks are elevated through our work, that instead of self-indulgence in eating or drinking or our other material affairs of this world, for our own purpose, we direct it toward godliness. So you're basically elevating the spark. And I'll just use the example of food because it's an easy one to speak about. You're elevating the spark. Where are you elevating? You're elevating it into Kedusha, all the way to the Kedusha, like we learned, of Atzilus. In Elikus of Atzilus, those sparks are being elevated all the way into B'chinas Atzilus, B'chinas Elikus Atzilus. Ein zeh shenetzutzes atzmon me'irim. This is not that, we're not talking about the very sparks themselves as they're embedded in the physical objects are radiating. Yes, it's a spark, because a spark has a certain element of light. But rather, we're focusing that through them, behen, in them, and through them, increases in the oyer of the elikus. So the oyer of the elikus, of godliness and atzilus is a certain level of godliness, like we spoke about. It's limited by the containers and defined and concealed to a certain extent. When we, in this world, battle that concealment and counter it with revealing the purpose of the spark by eating the food or the drink or in any other way, kol masechel l'shem shemayim, directing our actions. In all your ways you should know, all your maisim should be, your actions should be directed toward the sake of heaven. Or all your ways you should know God. So what are you doing? You're reversing the process of the concealment of the energy inside the container. You now have freed the spark, and the spark is now, where's it going? It's going back and being revealed that is part of a larger plan. To put it in, again, a simple English. When we are put into this world, so God created the world. We don't yet know our purpose until we become aware of it and we act on it. But there is a purpose. And the purpose of the divine within our existence is all hidden in the divine sparks of our lives. God allocates to each one of us a certain amount of sparks and says, now live your life wherever you're living, whatever you're doing, the personality I've given you, the connections you have, everything you'll be doing in your lifetime is, the purpose is, this journey is, like you said, tachlis yiridas ha'adam lamata, is to radiate and illuminate this darkened state. What does that mean? To direct your life instead of toward your own your own survival and your own needs, to direct it to the transcendence of connecting to the divine purpose in all of existence. When you're doing that, so all the sparks that you were given in your life are now becoming part of the larger narrative. Without that, everybody has their own little story, and they live their lives in their little whatever you want to call it, a little wormhole. When they understand the bigger purpose, so that's all becoming part of your the divine purpose of your life, the divine narrative. So your sparks are no longer these fragmented or disjointed details in life. They're all being directed. You are now writing this narrative. You're revealing the narrative of your life as directing it to the deeper, the higher purpose and the higher state of consciousness of godliness. As such, what is radiating here? Radiating is the oil. And the nitzutzos are in them, and through them, they're adding in that oil. But we're not talking about the nitzutz itself being transformed, like he says, What he means that the nitzutz are radiating. Of course, the nitzutz by definition means a spark is light, but the spark on its own is just a very glimmer. What is a spark in a dark room? Almost nothing. It's completely almost, yes, it's more than just complete darkness. But where does the spark come alive? When the sparks come together and they rejoin the mother flame, so to speak. Now the flame is Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. The human beings, the soul of man is the flame of God. The sparks are details of these sparks have so-called broken off, like it is. Sparks come from a larger flame. They're broken off into the details of our lives. When we serve God properly and we do our Veda, we're redirecting and we're gathering those sparks and we're connecting them back to the flame. So the flame is becoming larger. That's what he's saying here. So it's not about the sparks themselves are radiating, is the sparks are now increasing, adding into, like you said, Shebahen v'al but both behen, in them, and through them, there's Tesus ba'er, adds in the air, because listen, when you add fuel, so to speak, to the fire, in this case, sparks to the fire, you're making the fire greater. In the nimshal, in the moral, this is that the Eiris of Atzilus, when the Kalim in this world are refined, the Kalim of Atzilus become more refined, and now the Eir is growing much greater because we've elevated these sparks all the way upward. So it's the focus is on the Eir, Levad, and not that the Keli Nasa Eir, or in the case of Netzutz, it's not that the Netzutzes themselves are radiating, even though they are becoming part of that larger, that clarity and light, but that through them comes a Tesus Ba'er. So the Rebbe Rashab is still going to explain what this means. Because at the end of the day, he's going to qualify by saying, I'll take questions shortly. Let me just go to the next few lines because I think it'll answer a few of the questions that you may have. So even though this is not just a simple matter, the additional light and energy that came through the separation and clarification and elevation of the divine spark of the sparks is higher than the Eir on its own. Obviously, there's a big achievement when we do this. Like when we say that wine and a sharp aroma make pikhin, make the mind sharper. So the Gemara talks about this. We learned this earlier as well. That you see that even though we're talking about something on a physical level, but a strong wine and a strong aroma, a strong scent can actually sharpen the mind. Pikin from the word pikach, sharper. So what do you see from this? So we see from this that from the physical world, it increases in the air and the seichel through the effort in learning Torah with a higher light than the chachma of its on the chachma of the divine soul on its own. So he's giving this example for that you see that the sparks that through that work they increase the light more than they would be on its own. So I have to distinguish between the different examples he's giving here. The first example is not so much sparks, it's more, actually, we talk about chamer v'recha, you're talking about physical matters. However, what you see is that something lower can sharpen something more than it would have been on its own. So the Nefesh Elikis has, of course, a mind and it understands godliness. And yet you're saying that when a person is Esek and Teda, it increases even in the mind of the Nefesh Elikis. You also say that Chamer Recha, which are physical items, can sharpen the mind to be sharper than it would be on its own. Now he's giving an example which is more fitting to the animal soul. What does it say? V'rav tfuah is b'kayach sher. What the pasuk simply means is that much more tfuah, produce, and is produced b'kayach sher from the power of an ox. In other words, an ox who plows the earth is going to produce in 1 hour more than a human being can produce. That's why oxen are used in plowing fields. Today, with the technology Machines can do it even more powerfully, but Raf Tfuah is B'keach Sher. So it produces a lot more Tfuah, a lot more produce, a lot more the fruit of the work. B'keach Sher, Dafke. What does that mean in Aveda? The ox Sher is compared to the animal soul. Through the refinement of the animal soul, it increases power and strength in the divine soul much more than it would have on its own. Just like we see an animal, which is lower than a human being, can produce more. So there's something about going downward into the lower world and refining the sparks and elevating them that increases more than the oil would have on its own. So now the Rebbe explains this on Chassidus. What's the reason for it? What's the logic? So let's explain. The Arizal asks a question. Since you have Daimim Tzemeach Chaim Medaber is a hierarchy, and the hierarchy goes from the bottom up. Daimim, mineral, is the lowest form of life. You see no physical, you don't see any animated energy in it at all. It's completely inanimate. Semeach is more animated, but it still grows. It grows, and you see growth and movement, but it cannot move from one location. So it's more alive, and therefore has a little more divine, more energy, more revealed. Chai is even more so, because not only does it grow, but also can move. And it has all other parts of it that really are a whole different level of chayas and life and vitality that Shemeach doesn't have. And Medaber is the highest of all, because the Medaber has the power to speak, the power of independent intelligence, not just survival, and so on. Ask the Arizal a question. If that's the case, so why is the Medaber, the human being, dependent on lower species of life for sustenance? Chai, Tzemeach, and Daimim. Without it, we can't be alive. We're not like an amoeba. We're not like a self-contained entity that can just live on our own resources. We need mineral, vegetable, and animal to survive. Even if you can get away without animal, but we definitely need these lower species. Why would a higher species need a lower one? And the Arizal answers, because even though they're lower in Giluyim, but their root, it comes from a higher place. They come from the world of Toyu. And Toyu precedes Tikkun. So even though Toyu is not the perfect world, it's a world of imbalance. We learned the energies do not cooperate with each other, and they don't properly are not commensurate to the containers. The energies are very intense. The containers are very fragile, which ultimately creates shviras hakelim, the shattering of the containers. But it's a higher level of energy. So behema or chai, semeach, and daimim come from the world of toyu, and that's why a medaber, which comes from the world of tikkun. So in the world of giluyim, tikkun is a far more qualitative, higher world, spiritually, but not in intensity. So therefore, we get chayes from the nitzutzes that come from toyu that are embedded in chai, semeach, and daimim. The example being that a stone that falls from the higher part of the wall falls farther. So the higher it is, the farther it falls. So the lowest level species actually energize a higher species in that case. That's essentially the concept, that they come from Eres the Tesh, Shalamaylam Eres the Tikkun. So now when you refine the animal, or the Tzemeach and the Chai, through Birer HaNetzutzes, in Aveda, it's refining the animal soul. That's Raf Tvuz B'Keach Sher. The animal has more power than a human being, but a human being can harness an animal, and we can control forces that are more powerful than us. That's the human being was created with that intelligence. But there's something that we get in return, that the animal that plows the field, or an Aveda, the Aveda of the Birur, of the Nefesh Habamis, that adds strength and energy even in the divine soul. So this is all a Hagam. So this is a great achievement, that the Aveda down below is increasing energy, like he said. It encompasses, the Netzutzes get encompassed in the Kedusha, that increases energy. And it's more than the energy in L'mayla Ma'ir Mitzad Atzma. So something is achieved here. It's more than just Oyer. Till now, the Rebbe Rashab saying that it's not the refinement of the spark, it's not the radiating of the sparks themselves. It's not the keli itself became oir. It's only oir. But in oir itself, it did achieve a far higher level of oir, even qualitatively. So there's like a question on the table, so to speak, or a qualification. As it's known. And yet, it's still not the transformation of the container. It's true, it's a higher level of air. So he's going to explain. The primary inyan of this, what we just described, this additional, this abundance of energy that is added through Avodah below, through the Birur HaNetzutzis, Ikara inyan hazeh, who, next page, who ba'bir the bederech mamata l'mayla. This happens through the birur, the separation and the clarification, the birur that happens from the bottom up. Next page, 13, 14. The hainu shebederech melchama dafke. This is happening dafke in a form of battle and warfare. Why? Because the nitzutz is trapped inside this world. It needs work. It doesn't come easily. And as a matter of fact, when we talk about the animal soul and divine soul, they're at war with each other. The animal soul is not ready to give up its own selfish needs easily. And you don't need proof of this. Just look at your life. Tanya explains it elaborates on this. So it's a b'derech melchama. It's not that simple. The spark doesn't want to be free. It wants to remain there on its own. It takes avodah. It takes an effort and exertion. B'derech melchama, l'mata l'mayla, to create birur, to clarify, which means to separate and redeem and free the spark from its physical host, so to speak. When a birur happens, which means a powerful light comes from above and just shines and just elevates things. Even though this is also increases a great amount of energy, an abundant amount of energy, through the elevation of the sparks. I'll explain this in a moment, the difference between the two birurim. Nevertheless, its primary inyan is sheyir tesu sa'er. There, the primary thing is to add increased air. So the air is powerful air, it's coming down, and in some way it's like consumes the thing below, so it creates a birur. Its primary thing is to increase air v'koyach. I'm sorry. Inyan zeh sheyitisu tesu sa'er. One second. I'm 1 second. I didn't read it correctly. Sorry. It goes like this. So in a birur mamayla lamata, from the top down, even though it also increases great energy because it's elevating the sparks, but it's doing so from the top down, not from the bottom up. I'll explain that shortly. But kol mokim, nevertheless, the primary birur is when it's mamata l'mayla. The primary inyan, as it should be tesu seir v'kayach, that there should be an abundance of light and energy and power. The primary work in this is when you do it from the bottom up. So he's in the middle of a discussion now of what exactly happens in this process of increasing oir through the work below. So clearly there's something that's added. It's not just oir on its own. There's something new that's added here, but he hasn't obviously finished the topic. So we're in the middle of this discussion now, what exactly is happening that's increased. So let me just explain briefly the difference between maila mata, mata l'mayla. I actually gave the talk I gave to the students in the Holatera last week for Chav Ches Nissen, was the sikh about the Rebbe Tut Alts. I spoke about this at length. The difference, generally speaking, is you can, for example, when Adam and Chava were in Gan Eden, had they done what they had to do, the Alter Rebbe gives in Torah an example, it would have been like an avuka gdela, a powerful torch that was so powerful, it would draw all the sparks to it. He brings the example from Shlomo HaMelech. when King Solomon was king, so Malka Shva from Ethiopia and others brought gifts to him because his wisdom and his divine energy was so powerful that it drew others to him. That's a biru mamayla lamata. You don't have to go to war. You don't have to go and gather the sparks. The sparks are drawn to you because of your great power. So that's a birur, because you are drawing the sparks, but it's not internalized because it's not coming from the bottom up. It's not coming at the initiative from the effort from below. It's your powerful energy is drawing that closer to you. So it's really like, it's called Yashar. It's similar to the difference between Talmud Yerushalmi and Talmud Bavli. In Talmud Yerushalmi, you get closer to the conclusion right away. In Talmud Bavli, you have to go through questions and counter questions and arguments and disagreements. But Machshakim, you go from the dark, you get to the light. The second birur, which is Talmud Bavli, is Mamata Lamaila. There, you're not remaining in Eretz Yisrael or in Gan Eden. You're going to Europe, or you're going to the United States, or you're going to other parts of the world, and you're going to actually go gather those sparks. So that's Mamata Lamaila, and much more difficult. But when it's done, it's a far more internalized experience because it wasn't done from the top down, it's done from the bottom up. So he's saying here like this. What we're discussing, of course, is a birur mamata. Well, he didn't really spell it out, but basically he's saying that he's saying now that even though he began, the whole point is that it's all about oir, not so much about keli. But he's qualifying, he said, 1 second, through the keli, and through the darkness and through the animal soul, we're increasing oir that oir would not have been that oir beforehand. It's not the same as it's l'mayla ma'oir b'tzadatzme. So you clearly see there's something here that's more than just oir. So to just say this is just a revelation of oir, you can't say that either. There is something that's being achieved. He's going to end up saying, but still, it's all the focus is on gili oir, even though it's being achieved through the birur and so on. Now, what he added now was that the birur is mamata l'mayla, which only makes the strong question even stronger because it's coming from below. It's not that oir is coming to collect and gather the sparks. Is that it's coming from below. So you see that below, which is the ikar birur, like he says, the ikar teisvus oir is coming from the birur. This is about birur the mamata l'mayla. And he's going to now further explain it. And yet he's going to conclude it's still not the transformation of the keli or the transformation of the darkness or the transformation of the animal soul. It's still going to be Gilead. But I don't want to jump the gun. Let's just read further. So he says, Ubezeh gufa, and in this itself, in the biru mamata l'mayla, from the bottom up, ha'ikirhu k'shanefesh habam is ba'atzmei mis'erer. So now he's going further. The main primary birur is when the animal soul on its own gets stimulated. Not just that the divine soul is affecting it. Because you could have a situation where the divine soul is ultimately overpowering the animal soul and is persuading and convincing and educating it, not forcing it, educating it. But it's coming because the teacher, the nefesh alekis, is explaining it to the animal soul. But you could also come the other way around. For example, when the person hits rock bottom and the animal soul itself recognizing my life is not a good life. So the nefesh habamis on its own gets stimulated, not just by the divine soul. So how's that? What does that refer to? Rather, what's happening is through the isaskus of the nefesh alikisim and nefesh habamis, that through the work of the divine soul with the animal soul, it has such an impact. The animal soul itself gets stimulated and starts yearning, starts longing. Shall be explained. So actually, it's not quite what I said. I said hitting rock bottom was the animal soul. It's yes, the nefesh alekis can influence the divine soul can influence the animal soul, but it could also influence it to the point that the animal soul itself suddenly gets stimulated, as shall be explained. And now he continues and explains. You know, I want to stop, but I'll tell you the truth. It's all part of one long flow. So I'd rather just go through it all, and then we'll stop for questions. And he goes further, v'ha talia. And these 2 points are interdependent. What 2 points? The mamata l'mayla and the mulchama. The kasher biru b'derech mulchama, when the biru is coming in a form of a battle, oz yovi l'idei biru kazeh, then it comes to a point shanefesh abam is at bas'ered ba'atzmei, that the animal soul itself will be awakened and stimulated. V'chein, and the same thing with the netzutzes b'dvarim atachtenim oilim ba'atzma, and the same with the sparks that are in the matters in the physical items below. They too start elevating ba'atzmon u'kamoy mayim tachtenim beichin, like we have the expression that the lower waters cry, boy, they want to come and connect to the higher waters. They create, it's like a tsumayin, a thirst that they get. Like it says elsewhere. Okay, so this does conclude this side, and then he's going to now qualify all this. So what do we get from all of this? Let me just explain this whole piece. He's explaining that there's something that happens. It's not just oir. Oir is shining oir into kelim. We know upon creation, God created a beautiful world. He put the oir in the keli. The keli conceals on the real etzema oir, the bligvul, and so on, like we learned. Through avodah, and 1 second, and that oir continues to come down below through the parsa, the partition, all the way to the point it gets concealed in the world of good and evil down below. Our avodah reverses the process and starts revealing the divine energy. Okay, so that's fine. It reveals the divine energy, but it's more than just revealing divine energy. It's also adding something into the energy. So that's what he's qualifying. So it's not just oir versus keli. It's true, it's not the transformation of the keli. He's going to qualify that right now. But he says the fact of the matter is that even though there's new energy that's coming, the focus is on it. But the truth is, it's coming from a birur, and especially the birur mamat l'mayla. So you can't just say it's oir. It's not just a light that's shining and elevating things. It's the hard work from below in a form of mulchama, and that in turn transforms the physical world. And as it's transformed, it adds energy into the oir, even in Atzilus, and that's why we have all this abundant oir. So you see here, there's more than just oir involved. Kelim are involved, and the koyach sheir, the animal soul, and the sparks, to the point that they are elevating on their own. So you can't just say it's oir. There's more going on here than just the revelation of light. And yet, we'll learn in a few minutes, it's not the ultimate transformation. Now let me just explain the last piece. When the birur is not b'derech milchama, when the birur is oir yashar, which means from a mile lamata, so obviously you're not really transforming the animal soul. You're so-called overwhelming it. It's like a great light that's shining. Like I mentioned the example, you fight a war, you win the enemy, you win over the enemy country. And it could be by sheer power. The enemy says, you know what, it's worth it for me to just cooperate. You haven't really changed them. They're still not necessarily your friend, but the great oir that you brought, the benefits they have from it and others, has in some way elevated the sparks. When you do b'derech milchama, which means you're going down below and to the point that it's actually affecting something internally. And ultimately, so it's milchama on one hand, it's a battle, but when the milchama is over, what happened is that the actual entity has come to a place of thirst that it itself, like he said, recognizes. The nefesh habamis itself gets stimulated. So now you don't just have an enemy that's been overwhelmed, but you also have that the entity itself has come to appreciate the oir. So in that sense, he says, that's a meseder ba'atzmei, and also the sparks are not just that a great flame has elevated them, but they too feel the need to elevate and long. So you have something coming also from below upward. And yet, here's going to be the big qualification. Omnam, and this is the omnam, this is the oisfir, this is the end of the phrase that he began, because he started with hagam. Hagam shateshu seidus. This is higher than oir on its own because it's coming from within. Nevertheless, omnom ambamitis ha'inyan. However, in the truth of this inyan, meaning the true full picture, kol zman shelo higia lezeh lias ishapke chashechel nehera, that did not come to a place to reach a level of darkness being transformed to light. Ein zeh shanitzutz atzmon meirim. You can't call that the sparks themselves are radiating. Ki'im shrak mashageirmim teis v'seris. You could only say they've caused and they've added a new level of an abundant energy to more than the energy when it was on its own. But you can't say that they are fundamentally radiating because you haven't really transformed them. What you've done is, it's mamata lamayla, true, it's more than mamayla lamata, but the real focus is still on oir, and it's adding increasing oir. We have to understand what this means, but he says the statement very, very clear. Ubahates v'seidus, he says, and this abundance of energies that the nefesh habamis, that the netzutzis from below, that they increase. Yesh b'zeh gam b'chinas sharshan ha'mekera. They also have something from their root and source, which is higher than the oir on its own, like he said before with toyu. So even though the daimim tzemeach chai, the rav tvu is b'koyach sher, like he said, the animal soul, and the lower levels do draw from toyu, which is higher than tikkun, and they bring something that is not there in the oir on its own, but nevertheless, in this process that we're discussing, the primary focus is on oir and gilui. The primary focus is not on the sheirush shemakir of the physical items and their state of concealment. The main primary focus is ikar gilu b'chinas ha'er, is oir shenikar b'chal b'chinas ha'er de tikkun, and it's called in general the oir of tikkun, not toyu. Shenimshel b'chinas teisvis eir ba'kelim. So yes, there's more energy than on its own. It's nimshel, this additional abundant energy in the containers. Hainu shemeir etzem ha'er, that the etzem ha'er, which initially was concealed, is now being revealed in the containers. V'b'chinas gili ba'kelim, and it's now revealed in the kelim. That's the achievement that the Aveda with the animal soul has achieved down below. So yes, there is a major achievement here, but the focus is still on more gili oir, not on the transformation of the keli itself. Okay, I'm going to stop here for questions, but I want to just clarify this point a little more so we'll understand. Obviously, he's going to ultimately explain what means true transformation. We'll have a much clearer picture. But the fact is, we already learned enough for me to say the following. When he spoke earlier, for example, when he went back before, when we spoke about the difference between Laila Kiyom Yoyer, that the darkness itself shines. So he made it very clear on page 1306, it's not that the sun will also pierce the night. That's what he said. That's not such a pella. That's an achievement, that the light of Elikus should come down below, and through the divine soul, through our Aveda, we should reveal godliness in the dark world, to the point that we even convince the animal soul, to the point that even the animal soul is stimulated now on its own, and that the sparks in this world also appreciate the divine ma'atzman. Yes, it was achieved through Ur, but now they too are part of the process, and they're not only cooperating, but they're adding more Ur. He said that's still, the sun is still shining in the darkness. It's an achievement. It's more than the sun shining by night. But then he said the ultimate goal is that it's not the sun that's shining, the moon itself or the night itself. So remember, we learned about this earlier, that the kelim themselves come from tzimtzum. What gives them the ability to conceal? Because they come from the power of the helim of Elikus. It's not even oir. What we're talking about is that when a person has resistance, it adds more energy. When a person tries to stop you from doing something, it causes you to dig deeper. and you become even more powerful. Is that a gili of the Sheresh HaKelim or a gili of Eir? It's more Eir, but the Kelim, the concealment, is causing more Eir to be revealed. That's what he's saying. But it's not the actual revelation of the power of the container as it comes from what he called before the Koyach HaHelam or the Helam HaAtzmi, because that's the darkness itself. That's another discussion. That's a qualitative discussion about the very fact that these sparks come down to this world, into this dark world. The very fact that there's an animal soul that has the power to conceal the divine soul. The very fact that there are containers that conceal Oyer, that has not been redeemed. What you've done is you've shown that it's not a contradiction to godliness, that the Oyer of godliness can pierce the darkness, can pierce the containers, can pierce those sparks. But what we haven't really redeemed is the ultimate very darkness itself. The fact that even for 1 second there was darkness. The very fact that it could conceal is not revealing the divine. It's revealing Oyer, and it's not a contradiction to Oyer. Like we learned at the beginning of volume 3, he made it very clear. It's still Havaya Elakim. I'm just reading from the opening lines in the beginning of this volume. He said, Kol zeh agili d'shem Havaya. The Shem Havaya. Ach Mashakosav ein oid, that after the Gemara Berurim, Yeh Shem Elakim Atzmei. That Shem Elakim shu b'chinas Helam Yeh b'chinas Gili, just like Havaya. Not that Havaya hu Elakim, Havaya also penetrates Elakim, which is also a tremendous achievement. Even that's a major chiddush. But there's even more, that even that darkness and the concealment is also going to ultimately reveal something divine, which we're going to learn. We learned already about. We're going to learn more. That's what I'm taking from what we've learned. But here he's making it clear in the concept, in the process of Aveda, so even though this is Mamata Lamaila, and it's a Birur Mamata Lamaila, and it's of the, like he said, a Birur Mamata Lamaila Mederach Melchama, it's still not the transformation. It's just that the Eir is coming to the point that it has the power to affect even the animal soul, that the animal soul too should long for godliness. But it's still, like he says, Amitis Ha'inyan, that's not the Amitis Ha'inyan of, as long as you didn't reach totally Sapcha, you're still saying it's still all part of the story of Eir, not the story of Kalim. Essentially is what he's saying here. Okay.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question.
One second. I was about to say, let's take questions. I just want to make sure that I covered what I wanted to cover. Okay, yeah, he's going to continue discussing more about this idea of adding more air. So we have, I just want to sum it up with this. There's the regular flow of light that God uses in creation. We got that. There's an additional light that's added through the Aveda below. But it's still, the focus is on light. It's coming through Kalim, and the Kalim themselves and the animal soul itself is all being stimulated. But it's still not the full transformation and the story of the animal soul and the sparks themselves. It's still a story of light and increasing light. So there's going to be at a third level, which we're going to talk about transformation. So you see here, even in Birul Mamat Lamayli, you still can have something where the Eir is still the dominant feature here. Okay, I'll stop here for questions, comments, but the topic is far from over, I should say. So there's a lot more to come, but this is essentially what we've learned now today. Go ahead.
Rabbi Jacobson, can we also use the example of Matan Torah versus Purim in this that Matan Torah, it was all Gilui from above, and it was not internalized. But in the story of Purim, it was the Milchama. It was from below that we were able to achieve even higher. That's number one question. And number two is Meser Nefesh that we talked about before in a few pages back. That's a very a key ingredient to touching the Etzem Behelem. Is essentially the end result of the Nefesh Elokis convincing the Nefesh Habamit as to what it's good for it. And that's ultimately, in other words, the Meser Nefesh is the end result of that process.
Are you talking about level number 2? You're talking about the full transformation that he hasn't yet really
full transformation. I mean, the first question was
first
Matan Torah
question,
is all
Purim compared to Matan Torah can be understood just like he's saying here, but it's not full transformation. You could say Purim adds to Matan Torah what he just said here, that also the animal soul on its own appreciates it. But he says, as long as there's no, but it's still the story of not the story of Kalim. So I don't see, the Purim is to me, and Matan Torah can be explained based on what he just said here, but we're not talking about the third level. The third level, I don't see necessarily the case with Purim. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, thank you so much.
Regarding the second question, I'm not sure what the question is.
The second question was like Neser Nefesh that we always talk about, that it's the key ingredient. It's ultimately the end result of the godly soul convincing the animal soul.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I don't know. What the focus here is that even when we're refining something from within, the story can still be the focus is on Oyer and not necessarily the transformation of the sparks and the kalim themselves. It's still all about increasing more godly energy in existence. That's the main point he's making here. And that's going to lead us, at some point, he's going to come to explain what full transformation is. Ayin Beis. Any other questions?
So I have a question just to clarify. I think you've said it multiple times, but I just want to, let me say it in my own words if I may. You're saying that in this stage of birurim netzitzim, netzitzos, the clarification or the refinement of the sparks and the kalim, the inyan is that there's a revelation of light that was previously concealed by the kalim, by the klipa, but in other words, you're just showing light that's already there, but it's been concealed because of all the.
Not necessarily.
No, you're not saying that.
No, not necessarily. It could be. He doesn't make any mention of that. Not necessarily the case.
Well, where were the sparks before? They were there, but they just weren't revealed. You're saying it's a revelation of light. It's not the kalim's not me'irim itself. It's not transformed.
But that's not what he said here. He didn't say it's a revelation, because you could say it's a completely new thing that wasn't there before, in the sense that, that you did not pierce the dark. The animal soul and the darkness of this world concealed the divine, and now the divine is shining in this very dark place.
Well, we just said that.
Well, he doesn't say that. Let's put it this way.
But
that's not the focus here.
He said the whole purpose is the revelation of Shem Havaya in the Batachtanim.
But that doesn't mean it was shining before. It could just mean that's the focus is on Ur. That's what he's saying here. The focus is on Ur. He's not saying that the Ur was there and it was just had to be revealed. He doesn't say anywhere that line.
I'm just trying to use pure logic here. If it's not,
fine, but I'm just saying the Rebbe Rashab just doesn't say that.
Well, then where'd the light come from? It didn't come from above. You said it came from below.
Who cares where it came from? It doesn't matter. It came from the fact that a person worked hard in this world, exerted himself, fought a battle with his animal soul, which generated an energy that can never be generated on its own from creation.
So what is it to reveal? We're Megale Or. What does that mean?
Anyway, what should I tell you? He doesn't talk about.
But, okay, so maybe just because he doesn't say it doesn't mean we can't connect it with other ideas we've learned here. No,
you could, but I wouldn't connect it necessarily.
Not at all. You say I'm absolutely wrong about this.
I said it doesn't say. I just said he doesn't say it. You want to connect? I wouldn't connect it.
So what does it mean? So what does it mean to Megale Or?
One second. Let me make. I said I wouldn't connect it to because he doesn't mention it, and you can explain it different ways. You want to connect it? If you insist on connecting, what can I tell you? I wouldn't, because
okay, but then help me understand.
One second. Let me just say, you can explain it different ways. He doesn't say it, so there's no. When I learn the Maimer, I don't see that point.
Okay, but we spent hundreds of pages talking about the revelation of light. If this isn't that, then what is the revelation of light relative to what's going on here?
That's not the 100. I wouldn't sum up the 100 pages quite that.
I'm not.
So I got a little tempted.
One second. Can everybody mute? Because Two people are speaking.
No, I'm thoroughly confused now because forget about hundreds of pages. We have talked in great depth, not just here, but also in Tanya, etc.
What's what I'm saying? Let me tell you this. Confusion is good because it means what I would suggest is to go back and just read the lines themselves and go back to what I referred to. I read a few lines from this page. I read from 1306, and I read from the bottom of volume page 1207. So I think if you go back and read it again, it's fine. I think you'll get clear. So it's fine. It's a complicated topic. I'm not suggesting you're going to get it in one shot, in one sitting.
So this is a new concept. This has nothing to do with revelation of light.
I don't know what we mean by revelation. What do you mean by revelation of light? I mean, the way you're phrasing it is that the light is like behind the door, and
Correct.
now we open up. That is not the language he's using here at all. He doesn't use that language. That the point here is that we're talking not about the transformation of the concealment of Kalim and of Helam, but we're talking about revealing more godliness.
I get that. I'm not going
That's
to
the main
transformation
focus.
of the I'm not. Look,
Hold on. That's the main focus of what he's saying.
I get it, but maybe you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm not talking about the Kalim are that the Kalim are going to be radiating light, which is the second part, which we haven't gotten to. That's the transformation of the Kalim. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about or, exclusively or, and we've talked.
It could be a chiddush. But I said, I fully understood what you said, and I'll say it again. It can completely be understood here, not as a gili of something that was just there waiting to be freed. It could be seen here, even that level, as a total chiddush that only happens in this world. That is the chiddush of avodah in this tachtenim, where you come in this world and you do something that was never done before. You reveal a whole nother dimension of light that would never have been revealed unless you had to fought the battle with the animal soul, a difficult war, a difficult exertion, and you actually created an oir that was unprecedented, not just revealing an oir that was just waiting to be released.
And you're saying that was certainty? You're saying that
fully explain it that way.
Okay, so you're not sure whether it's one or the other.
I wouldn't go there because you can explain it both ways. That's
okay,
why.
but you can understand.
I'm not sure. No. I'll tell you exactly what I'm sure of. I'm sure of that. The Rebbe Rashab wanted to say that he would have. So I'm telling you that you could explain it both. They both can be true. It could be there's a level of gilui that you reveal that was there and just a matter of time, and now you revealed it, or you actually change the animal soul, that the animal soul should really appreciate godliness, and that's a qualitative paradigm shift. And both can be true. I would, if you really want me to say what I want to say, is that both can be accurate. That's why I wouldn't limit it just to what you're saying.
Okay. All right. Well, then
that's the point I'm making, because when learning Chassidus, when you learn Chassidus, you look out for these things. You see, if the Rebbe Rashab wanted to say that, and that would have been the main thing, it would have been easy for him to say it. That the truth is, all this is really just Gilia Oyer. He's not saying that. He's saying it's all about Oyer. It's true, there's an element of that. You could say that at the end of the day, the Helam Ha'atzmi is completely new, and Gilia Oyer, even though it's a new Oyer, through Avodah, is still the world of Oyer. You could say that, but you're saying less than that. You want to say it was there, and it's just a matter of revealing. You could argue that it's not just that. That's on one level. It's not the ultimate level that he's saying here. That's why I'm trying to broaden the horizon that he wants to encompass here.
So then, what are, just to finish this off? Then what are the nitzitzut? They're there. They weren't created. It's birureha nitzitzut. So the nitzitzut were there before. They weren't created anew.
Yeah, but what was created anew was that they came to a new place that they never entered before, which was being trapped in the world of Elam Hazeh, which he called Cheshach Kafla Mechupel. So what's new is the conditions of where they're in. And that's the newness here. So even though it's true, listen, everything, at the end of the day, even when the Kalim themselves will be transformed, you could also say they're not new. The Helam Ha'atzmi was there before too. The Helam Ha'atzmi that gave everything, that gave even the Helam power, also existed before, if you want to speak that way. The question is, what means something was there and something wasn't there? Is there a real achievement when we make a dir b'tachtenim? Do we accomplish anything? God is everywhere. And God even gave the power to make a dir b'tachtenim. And even the helam, even the very helam, I'm not even talking about the errors that we're discussing, was also there. But yet there's something about our avodah that does something new. Now, this is a big topic in Chassidus. What is the newness of it? There's a Maimer Tiku, Tafrei Samach Zayin and Samach Vav, he talks about it. There's a Sichus of the Rebbe in Shmois and a lot of places where this is discussed. What is the transformation of this world Gilui Helam or Yesh Ma'ayin? It's a question that's asked. Is the world really a garden that we're just revealing? Or is there something new and unprecedented that we're achieving? And the end of the answer is that both are correct. They both have elements. So there's an element of something revealing, but there's also an element of something completely new. The Netzutzos is the same story. Of course, there's an element that they came from somewhere, like he says here. But they came from Toyu, they came from that higher level, and he says the focus still is on Ur. He says clearly the focus is not where they came from. Keep that in mind. So the focus is on the Ur that they bring. There's that part. Look, it's just like we say the neshama and the guf. The soul is like Ur, the guf is like a keli. They both, the Ur of the neshama, we know we can trace its steps. Tatzilas bri yitzir asiyah. The guf is harder to trace. You have to go all the way up to the highest levels. So we need both. We need giluyim of Ur. We also need transformation. So I would say that both are happening all the time. There's elements of transformation, which is new, and there's elements of Gili. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. This is the topic that really is the bigger topic that I would introduce if we're going to go and discuss it on this level. And this is a topic in Chassidus. This is not reserved only to this piece of Ayin Beis. It's in many places talked about.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad I asked. Very important distinction.
Yeah, no problem. No, great. Okay. So we'll stop here, middle third down of page 1312, right before Kamach. We're going to continue to talk. I think this is going to become all clearer and clearer as we continue to learn about it. If you go back, for example, the beginning of Ayin Beis, volume 1, his whole discussion whether the Sfiris are Yesh Ma'ayin or Gilui Helam. Is it something new or revealing something that was there? And he first says is the Eiris are not new, the Kalim are new. Then he says even the Eiris also have something that's new. And even the Kalim have something that's not new. I mean, it's a big topic on the whole discussion of, because you want to ultimately have the interface of godliness, but also existence. And existence is clearly a new entity. And you want dir b'tachtenim not just to be a game where God concealed himself, we revealed him, and that's it. It's an actual transformation going on. Remember, heavy prices were paid. We had a Holocaust. We've had death, tragedy. We have thousands of years of terrible light, of terrible events. So you have to take all that into account. It's not a small matter of just, like hide and seek and revealing.
I certainly don't want to minimize any of what you just said for the past 5 to 7 minutes, but lahavdil, like you've given the Shiur, the Tanya Shiur, what you're talking about, the Shloshos made Tmeos and the Klipas Noga in particular, last Tanya episode, and you talk about, give the mashal about, in general, about the king who hides from his son to see if the son is clever enough to find the king. And that seems like, that's
only one piece of the story. That's not the whole story. That's one example regarding the concept of the concealment being the source. But then there's a thing called, the Torah says that a person's put to death if they do a crime. That's a little more than just the father concealing. So clearly there's a thing called crime. There's a thing called real evil and cruelty. And we see it, real pain. So yes, it's rooted in a concealment like that, but there's a lot more going on. Shalosh Klipas Atmeis just tells you there's an objective reality of things that are forbidden, period. There's no redemption for them, except in certain manners, but generally speaking. So there's more than, that's one part of the puzzle. It's a big puzzle. Chassidus is a pretty complex system.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you again for clarifying, and please forgive my pressing you.
No, it's, I don't know if I clarified it, just printing out certain
You
points.
did. You
A lot
did,
more to clarify, to be honest. Yeah, but,
for sure. Thank you.
okay, so we'll stop here.